Let me tell you something. This is probably the greatest deception of our generation. A call for action, a call for change, a call for all humanity. No longer will I be silent. I will speak, and I will be heard. Because what happened that day, I no longer call an attack. I call it the 9/11 incident. Since then, two things have shaped our world. A loss of thousands of lives, and a narrative repeated so often it became the truth. A narrative that divided us. A narrative that put the fear in us and that convinced the world that we're at war. But today, that stops. Think, question, don't fear. Because fear divides, but unity is stronger. Together we question, together we uncover, together we move forward.
What if everything you think you know about reality is wrong? What if the glitches, the mysteries, and the unanswered questions are clues? From conspiracies and the paranormal to science, consciousness, and the possibility we're living in a simulation. This is the One Opinion in 8 billion podcasts. Every week, we dive into the biggest mysteries of our world. Subscribe now and be a part of the discussion. Question everything. Nothing is off limits.
Hi guys, welcome to another episode of One Opinion in 8 billion. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about the 9/11 incident. So today what I'm going to talk to you about is the conspiracy behind 9/11, and I'm going to show you something that I think is very powerful, and it's from the Zeitgeist, the movie. If none of you have ever seen it, it's on YouTube, and it is absolutely awakening and mind-blowing. There's 3 movies altogether. I think the second one's Addendum, the Zeitgeist Addendum, and the third one is Zeitgeist Moving Forward, or Moving Forward, I think, yeah. But either way, go check them out if this sort of stuff interests you, because I've watched it after the release of my book, all of this podcast, well, up until this podcast, and it's exactly what I'm trying to say. It's exactly what I'm trying to achieve by awakening people, opening their eyes to seeing what they might have an inkling of, but they just kind of push it to the side. But honestly, I'll put the link, but it is out of this world. So I'm going to show you a section from that, and I'm going to discuss it as I go, from my own knowledge, from the information that's in my book, and you guys can let me know what you think. So let's get on.
With them. They ignore them or denounce them as blasphemers.
It is wrong, blasphemous, and sinful for you to suggest, imply, or help other people come to the conclusion that the U.S. government killed 3,000 of its own citizens.
As if a demolition team set off when you see the old demolitions of these old buildings.
It looks like one of those scenes of an old building being purposely dynamited and blown up.
Anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under-infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
The way the structure is collapsing, this was the result of something that was planned. It's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way. How they accomplished this, we don't know.
The building collapsed to dust. You don't find a desk. You don't find a chair. You don't find a telephone, a computer. The biggest piece of a telephone I found was half of the keypad, and it was about this big.
What happened to the concrete? The concrete was pulverized from river to river. There was dust powder 2-3 inches thick. The concrete was just pulverized.
Reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
If they had detonated, if they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
I heard a second explosion.
There was a heavy-duty explosion.
Then there was some secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses.
An explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
To me, it sounded like an explosion.
It sounded like gunfire. Bang, 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 bang. And then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
We heard a big explosion coming down.
And then the entire top of the building just blew up.
We saw some kind of explosion.
By the force of the explosions.
Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor.
Then we get to the lobby. This is a big explosion.
The lobby looked as though a bomb had exploded there.
A huge explosion now, raining debris.
It's been a huge explosion.
Huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
We just witnessed some kind of follow-up explosion. We heard a very loud blast explosion.
The secondary explosion at Tower 1 camp.
That is another bomb going off. He thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. Planted in the building.
So first of all, guys, you know, I mean, that's always been the main theme behind 9/11, is that there was detonations and that it looks like a controlled demolition. Now, a bit of background on me. I've got a degree in architecture, which was one of the things that, I mean, I've always been fascinated by architecture. I didn't do it till later on in life, but I already had my inklings of this being a conspiracy or a cover-up, call it what you will. It just, for me, when it comes to conspiracies, like I mentioned in the book, a coincidence is fine, but when they start stacking up, that's when it becomes, you know, how many coincidences can really be toppled together before you start to question things and start to ask yourself that that's just not right. And I think that's how a conspiracy starts, is when, you know, the majority of the population just, it just doesn't add up. So you've just heard several eyewitnesses there. Some of them are firefighters, police officers, people that were in close proximity to the 9/11 incident. I mean, it looks like a textbook controlled demolition in a built-up urban area. You know, both the towers fell, well, and Building 7 fell pretty much without scratching another building on the way down. The way they fell is what's the most interesting part. If you know anything about cutting trees, I know this sounds crazy, but if you're chopping a tree, you chop it to where you want it to fall. So you're chopping here, it's going to fall that way. The two towers are hitting both strategically different areas. So one was more on a corner and one was more in sort of smack bang in the middle. Now, the way that these buildings were built, which you'll hear later on, is that they were actually built with the potential of a plane collision because of how high they were and how many airports are in close proximity to the centre of New York, that it was, you know, a strong possibility for whatever reason. So they were actually built to take that into consideration with its centralised columns, its steel beams, the way the foundations were built and everything like that. So when the one that was hit on the corner, let's just say that was structurally damaged, vulnerable, and was going to fall. Why did it implode on it? Why didn't it just fall off under, you know, snap under the pressure? So you're cutting like the tree, so that's the corner that's here. So the most weight bearing is now on that corner, so it would just crumple and topple. Why would it implode? Now, they were both hit differently, like I said. I was 14, I think, when this happened. I remember watching it. I remember being absolutely devastated and mortified and everything else that's bad and upsetting. I felt for all the people that were involved, felt for all the people whose families had to pick up the pieces. Felt for all of the emergency services that had to risk their life to try and prevent or save life. And straight away I was just like, this doesn't look right. You know, there was announcements about Building 7 collapsing before it even collapsed. You know, they were able to identify the hijackers, and just everything about that morning was just off, as we'll hear as we carry on. So, but we'll move on to the next one, and we'll discuss that one after.
I don't think anybody could have predicted that they would try to use an airplane as a missile, a hijacked airplane as a missile.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
No specific threat involving really a domestic operation or involving what happened, obviously, the city's airliner and so forth.
There were no warning signs that I'm aware of.
USA Today reports that in the 2 years before the attacks on September the 11th, NORAD conducted exercises using hijacked airliners as weapons. And one target was the World Trade Center.
In confidential documents from the Philippines obtained by CNN, the plan was clear. He will board any American commercial aircraft, control its cockpit, and dive it at the CIA headquarters. Other buildings targeted the Pentagon and the World Trade Center.
The Federal Aviation Administration received 52 warnings about Al-Qaeda in the 6 months before 9/11 and did not apparently heed them.
The Pentagon reportedly does not want the public to hear next week's Senate testimony about the former secret intelligence unit known as Able Danger.
And it identified Mohammed Atta and 3 other 9/11 terrorists as members of an al-Qaeda cell in Brooklyn, New York, more than a year before the attacks.
And we found 2 of the 3 cells which conducted the 9/11 attacks.
Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, who was the first member of Able Danger to go public, has now been told in writing by the Defense Intelligence Agency that he can't speak to members of Congress or their staff without prior approval.
This is an attempt to prevent the American people from knowing the facts about how we could have prevented 9/11, and people are covering it up today.
Security in counterterrorism was blinking red, in the words of George Tenet, that the warnings of an imminent attack were so severe that something dramatic should have been done. It was unparalleled. Instead, our president went on a month-long vacation.
The head of Pakistani intelligence at the ISI, Mahmoud Ahmed, requested Omar Sheikh to wire $100,000 to Mohammed Atta, who was the lead hijacker.
Hijacker Mohammed Atta received wire transfers via Pakistan. The man sending the money to Atta is believed to be Ahmed Umar Saeed Sheikh.
Omar Sheikh admitted he was supported by the Pakistan government's intelligence service, the ISI.
As hard as this is to believe that 2 of the alleged terrorists involved in what happened on Tuesday may have attended schools run by the U.S. military.
Evidence was also apparently planted. The passport of one of the hijackers on Flight 11 was allegedly found in the rubble.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
The 9/11 hijackers are alive and well. That's according to the chief of Japan's Democratic Party, who says 9/11 is a hoax.
Several of these 19 men are still alive.
So guys, from the information you've just seen, there's a few things in there that I wasn't even aware of when I did when I've done my research in the past. that that I've included in my book. So this money that was transferred, and then members of that government in the White House the morning of the incident. That's just another, flukes and coincidences. How many times can they actually, this is like these incidents occurring at those specific moments are almost like the odds of winning the lottery. A lot of these that you're going to see are the odds or the coincidences, such as later on you'll hear about them doing hijacking tests that very morning, the military, and that's what caused a lot of the confusion and delays in F-16 response, or in terms of military air defense response. And these odds of occurring are just, one in such a high number. It's implausible for one of them to occur, for multiple of them to occur at the same instance around the same incident is just, it's so implausible. If it wasn't so devastating, it would be amusing that we're even being palmed off that this is the narrative of what happened. And I'm hoping that you guys can see that, any of those that have been on the fence, any of those guys that are completely like, no, this couldn't happen. There'd be so many people, to keep quiet. And we all know that people can be kept quiet through, fear of their life, fear of, their careers, call it what you will. People have been silenced in the past. I think that's pretty clear. Again, coincidences that someone, comes out with something that they shouldn't have, and then all of a sudden they die of a, accident or natural causes, or they just disappear off the face of the planet, out of social view. But they're saying that some of these hijackers are still alive. There's a lot of links between America funding education and top members of Al Qaeda, including Osama bin Laden. There is ties to Osama bin Laden's family directly to the Bush, or the Bushes, family. And I just don't understand how anyone can think anything different other than what's being portrayed here in front of you, from the horse's mouth, so to speak. This isn't just me. This isn't just hundreds or millions of, thousands, millions of others. This is what you're seeing here is the truth. And you can say, oh, this was left out, that was left out. They showed that because it looked worse. And yeah, all that's true. But so is it on the other side. They show us what they want us to see to solidify their version of events. But this stuff here is simple stuff that's taken from the day, or just after, or the weeks after, whatever. And, you got eyewitness accounts talking about explosions and gunfire, and, depending on your proximity to the said explosions, it could sound like gunfire if it was multiple explosions, which if they're blowing foundations or the central core for it to implode on one another, which would have been the most likelihood, then you are going to hear so it is going to sound like rapid gunfire, especially to people that don't maybe know what gunfire really sounds like outside of films. But we'll go on and we'll discuss the next one.
course we're after Saddam Hussein. Bin Laden. He's
In the early 1980s, bin Laden worked with operatives from U.S. intelligence, the Pakistani military, and Arab states.
January 2001, the Bush administration orders the FBI and intelligence agencies to back off investigations involving the bin Laden family, including two of Osama bin Laden's relatives, who were living, guess where, in Falls Church, Virginia, right next to CIA headquarters.
When he was already America's most wanted criminal, he reportedly spent 2 weeks in the American hospital in Dubai, was treated by an American doctor, and visited by the local CIA agent.
We have not seen one piece of evidence that links Osama bin Laden directly to the planning stages of September 11th.
This failure to provide proof was later said to be unnecessary because bin Laden, in a video allegedly found in Afghanistan, admitted responsibility for the attacks.
In 1976, Osama's older brother Salim bin Laden hired a man in Texas by the name of Jim Bath to handle all the investments in the United States for the bin Laden family. Jim Bath also happens to be a personal, almost lifelong friend and former Air National Guard pilot with George W. Bush. The connections between the Bushes and the bin Ladens become much more clear when George Herbert Walker Bush made trips to Saudi Arabia in 1998 and 2000 to meet with the bin Laden family on behalf of a company called the Carlyle Group.
How could anyone fly a 60-ton, 125-foot wide, 44-foot tall plane through this obstacle course?
The aircraft, before striking the Pentagon, reportedly executed a 270-degree downward spiral, and yet Hani Hanjour was known as a terrible pilot who could not safely fly even a small plane.
No seats, no luggage, no bodies. Nothing but bricks and limestone.
The official explanation is that the intense heat from the jet fuel vaporized the entire plane. Flight 77 had two Rolls-Royce engines made of steel and titanium alloy and weigh 6 tons each. It is scientifically impossible that 12 tons of steel and titanium was vaporized by jet fuel.
We're also told that the bodies were able to be identified either by their fingerprints or by the DNA. So what kind of fire can vaporize aluminum and tempered steel and yet leave human bodies intact?
From my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. And as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand.
Shortly after the strike, government agents picked up debris and carried it off. The entire lawn was covered with dirt and gravel, so that any remaining forensic evidence was literally covered up. The videos from security cameras, which would show what really hit the Pentagon, were immediately confiscated by agents of the FBI, and the Department of Justice has to this day refused to release them. If these videos would prove that the Pentagon was really hit by a 757, most of us would assume the government would release them.
Okay, so you've seen there the links between the Bush family, America, and Osama bin Laden. There was also links with Pakistan, with a corporate company that even Osama bin Laden's brother was in Washington, I think it said, on the morning in a meeting. And then you've got the Pentagon. So I think we can all safely say that America is probably one of the most, if not the most, protected and secure countries to try and commit an attack on. I don't know the ins and outs of the safety and the security protocols of America, but I'm pretty good with the military knowledge, and the Pentagon being one of very few places in America I know is one of the most protected buildings on the planet. Now, with that being said, it is predominantly military based. You know, it's the central military defense. Even if there is these training ops simulating hijacked planes, which were also, you know, years before simulated on an attack on the Twin Towers directly. Are we really to believe that the American military is incompetent enough to not, when things are going on, so when the first tower was hit at the very latest, are we really to believe that all training ops aren't ceased immediately and redirected? You know, this wasn't one plane, two planes. This was 4 planes that had gone off course. Now, you know, if it's a commercial airliner, they are being watched over by towers, you know, closest, you know, with radar. If they go off course at all, most planes today are done on autopilot anyway. Bit like a sat nav, you press autopilot and it literally does everything for you. So let's say there's bad weather and it goes off course. They're going to get in touch, you know, the people on the ground are going to get in touch with that plane to find out what's happening. It's as simple as that. You know, it's common sense. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. You don't have to be anybody that knows about planes, radar, or anything like that. It's just common sense, even just from watching films. So there's that. So how anyone can buy this delay and confusion with one of the biggest, most powerfulest militaries in the world, that they all got confused with commands and orders, and it's just implausible. But, you know, I'm digressing, so that's one way of looking at it. But let's just talk about the Pentagon for a second. So are we to believe that, I mean, you've got a security system which is called SAMS, which is surface-to-air missile systems. Now, from films and stuff, you can't really believe anything that happens on there. But I would like to think that as a last line of defense, that places like the Pentagon would have some similar kind of system as to a SAMS system operating, so that if all other defences, security measures, protocols had all failed, at the very least, they could send a missile or something like that from the Pentagon itself. I would be shocked if that wasn't probably top secret, probably confidential, but I'd be shocked if they didn't have the ability to be able to have done that when 9/11 happened and when this incident happened. So, I mean, we'll never probably know, but I find it very hard to believe that some of the most top-ranking military strategists, officials, intelligence, all in the Pentagon, they're going to risk all that without some sort of last line of defense. So, the plane is now coming towards them. By this point, the radar team in the Pentagon will be able to see that, because obviously they're checking the air surrounding them. Now, they're going to have a protocol within, I don't know. I mean, if there was a plane off course and coming directly at you, 50 to 100 miles, that's nothing in plane terms. They're going to be getting on, get on the radio saying, identify yourself, explain what's going on, rah-de-rah-de-rah. How has a plane even got close to the Pentagon, let alone hit it? Now, you've seen one of the pictures there, which is probably one of the best pictures, actually. That's not made by a plane. Well, let me rephrase. That's not made by a 757 plane. If it was, well, wherever it hit on the Pentagon, that whole section of a Pentagon would have been gone. Now, it doesn't say it in this particular movie, but I do mention it in my book, and it is quite widely known that there was a large, I can't remember if it was, I'm pretty sure it was around 2.2 or 3 trillion dollars in military spending that had basically been unaccounted for, that it was being investigated. Now, the irony was that the evidence for this investigation was in 2 places. One, I think it was Building 7, but it was one of the World Trade Centers that got hit and destroyed. That was one. The other one was right where this explosion happened. So therefore, all of this money that is unaccounted for or physically being investigated prior to 9/11 was right in that section that was destroyed. So the two lots of evidence to weigh up, both gone. Same instance, in the same sort of way. Again, coincidences are just stuck in. And you've already heard about 7 or 8, 9 by now. Really? They're taking the CCTV. The federal, the FBI are taking the CCTV. Very similar to what happened on the JFK assassination. Another huge conspiracy that just does not add up unless Lee Harvey Oswald can bend bullets. But that's another podcast. But how that specific spot of the Pentagon, if somebody has planned so well to be able to attack America in such a devastating way, why were the finishes so sloppy? If this was all, because the planning for this attack would have been years and years it would have taken to plan this. And then let's take coincidence off of it. Let's put on the fact that on the exact day that this attack was planned, with years in the planning before, it just so happens that there's a training exercise for the military on hijacked commercial airliners on the morning that they've planned. Doesn't sit well. Let's move on.
It looks like there's nothing there except for a hole in the ground.
Basically, that's right. The only thing you could see from where we were was a big gouge in the earth and some broken trees. We could see some people walking around in the area, but from where we could see, there wasn't much left.
Any large pieces of debris at all?
No, there was nothing that you could distinguish that a plane had crashed there.
The FBI and the state police here have confirmed that they have cordoned off a second area about 6 to 8 miles away from the crater here. This is apparently another debris site. Why would debris be located 6 miles away? Could it have blown that far away? Seems highly unlikely.
Pancake theory. according to which the fires, while not melting the steel, heated it up sufficiently to cause the floors weakened by the airplane strikes to break loose from the steel columns, and this started a chain reaction.
So you would expect then from that theory, which is the official theory, to see a whole stack of floors piled up on top of each other and then a spindle of core columns standing too.
The core of each of the twin towers consisted of 47 massive steel columns. If the floors had broken loose from them, these columns would have still been sticking up into the air 1,000 feet.
The plane did not cut all those core columns.
We designed the buildings to take the impact of the Boeing 707 hitting the building at any location.
The building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners.
That the plane flew straight into the building.
Manager of construction,
So you're saying
architect.
that the building was actually designed to cope with a hole like that and still survive?
Yeah, it was.
If you had dropped, say, a billiard ball from the top of the World Trade Center, 110 floors up there, it would have taken 8 to 10 seconds to hit the ground, encountering no resistance whatsoever.
The Twin Towers came down in nearly free fall speed. 200,000 tons of steel shatters and explodes outwards over 500 feet.
This means that floors shattered at an average rate of about 10 floors per second.
There is no scenario for a pancake effect of buildings falling that allows them to fall at the rate of free fall.
Now what can do that? What can move mass out of the way? Explosives. "47 huge steel columns going up the core. They're interconnected. How do you get them to fail simultaneously so the core disappears?" It looks like those core columns were cut.
The way we do this is by cutting the beam at an angle.
I started looking at the molten metal. All three buildings, both towers in the rubble, in the basement areas, and Building 7, there's these pools of molten metal.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry. Like lava.
The molten steel was found 3, 4, and 5 weeks later when the rubble was being removed. He said that molten steel was also found underneath World Trade Center 7.
So I'm looking through the official reports. What do they say about the molten metal? They say nothing. But wait a minute. This is important evidence. So where'd that come from? Thermite is so hot that it'll just cut through steel, through structural steel, for example, like a knife through butter. The products are molten iron and aluminum oxide, which goes off primarily as a dust. You know those enormous dust clouds? You can imagine when you assemble these chemicals on a large scale.
So, Professor Niels Harrit, you examined the rubble that came from the World Trade Center. What did you find in it?
Well, in there we find remains of what we characterize as a thermitic material. And this is a very energetic material which can be used either for melting iron or it can be designed as an explosive. The evidence for controlled demolition is overwhelming. I've told you that the thermite reaction produced molten iron. Molten iron was in pools of molten iron in the rubble. And the point is that the thermite kept on reacting. This was a bitch's brew of thermite chemistry.
Molten metal pools under both towers after they collapsed and Building 7. Now, Building 7 wasn't even hit by a jet.
Part of the problem is that most people simply don't know much about Building 7 due to the extraordinary secrecy surrounding this collapse.
And this was a 47-story skyscraper. This building fell at 5:25.
It was not hit by a plane. This building had fires on only 2 or 3 floors.
And it was brought down by what we know was a controlled demolition.
Demolitions, they look just like that. You know, a kink in the middle, and then that building just comes straight down, almost at free fall speed.
office was on the B1 level. As I was talking to a supervisor at 8:46, and all of a sudden we hear, boom! An explosion so hard that pushed us upwards. And it came from the basement between the B2 level and the B3 level. And when I went to verbalize, we hear, boom! The impact of the plane on the top.
It would appear, Jim, as if there's more smoke coming from the ground.
I was down in the basement, came down, all of a sudden the elevator blew up.
And as we were coming out, we passed the lobby. There was no lobby. So I believe the bomb hit the lobby first, and a couple of seconds then the first plane hit.
As I'm walking by the main freight car of the building, in the corridor, that's when I got blown. I mean, the impact of the explosion threw me to the floor, and that's when everything started happening. All of a sudden, a big impact happened again, and all the ceiling tile was falling down, the light fixtures were falling. You know, you got to go clear across the whole from 1 to 2 World Trade Center. And then all of a sudden, it happened all over again. Something else hit us to the floor. Right in the basement, you felt it. Walls were caving in, everything that was going on. I mean, I know people that got killed in the basement. I know people that got broken legs in the basement. People that got reconstructive surgery because the walls hit them in the face.
So there you go, guys. You know, you've just heard from people that work there, people, emergency services, physicists, well, not physicists, but professors in physics. You know, the interesting things when it comes to the science side of it is, for me, was the way that they said that the columns are structurally cut before demolition takes place, and then at the base, you know, the remnants of the World Trade Centers, the beams are clearly, I mean, it doesn't look like it's melted or snapped. You know, it looks laser cut almost. Then you've got the molten still, like lava, running underneath the rubble. Jets don't create that temperature. But then, if you want to argue that one, Building 7 wasn't hit by a plane. It was announced that it fell before it even did fall. I've struggled to find that footage, but if I ever do find it, I will be showing you. And again, Building 7 fell exactly the same as the World Trade Centers 1 and 2. So why are all these occurrences happening so similarly? They were all hit differently or not hit at all. And yet they're all, you know, they were built to withstand, especially the towers. They were built to withstand it. You just heard it from the architect, the engineer, the manager of the construction of the Twin Towers. You know, they've got the central steel core, so that if something does hit, it's going to take out the outer layers. You know, I'm not saying that there wouldn't be massive destruction, because it would be. I'm not even suggesting that parts may not have crippled under the extreme and immense pressures and temperatures, but to implode completely down to base level, it's not really plausible for me. Now, I want to say quickly that this is in no way a disrespectful podcast. I've got nothing but absolute huge respect for all of those that lost their lives during and after, and the families of those. I can't even begin to know what you've gone through, and I feel for every single one of you. I think this is one incident that truly gripped the emotions of the world and humanity as a species. It was just devastating from start to now, because of everything that's happened since. At the beginning of that clip, we heard about Flight 93. Now, a lot of you will be aware of Flight 93. That was another plane that was hijacked. And long story short, the passengers overthrew the hijackers, who had unfortunately killed the flight crew. So it subsequently was crashed into a non-populated area, you know, for the good of the many. The crater impact where suggestible is where the planes hit. It's hard because there's so many things that come into, you know, when it comes to impacts. It's really hard to, and I'm not a scientist or anyone like that, but it doesn't look like a plane had hit. It looked more like a missile strike had hit that particular bit of ground. How debris could be found 6 miles away of such substance is unplausible for me. Could you have some bits of stuff 6 miles away? I still struggle with it. But sections of the plane, not so much. I think the biggest tragedy about all of this is that people have lost their lives for whatever reason, however you want to play it out. Now, if I've heard witness statements from people that died on Flight 93 that when they obviously knew what was going on and they'd taken control of the plane, they were all ringing their loved ones. So that happened. It's not taking away that happened. I think the argument with this particular one is, was that the point at where the plane crashed? You know, and if it wasn't, where did it, or what else happened? I think that's the issues behind it. But, you know, I'm not going to drag on because this video is, it's mind-blowing. And honestly, there's so much stuff in all three movies that will just blow your mind. And if you're someone like me that does question things, does analyze things, does think, oh, that doesn't really make sense, or wants to know the truth and stuff, these three movies are just flawless. And I will put all links for the ones that I particularly watch, because there's a few different different versions. But the three that I've watched, which I believe are the official ones, I will put them in the post description, because I do feel that you know, it's something that everyone needs to watch, and especially somebody that is a skeptic. If you're someone that believes that the 9/11 incident was true, as we're told, I'm not denying that planes hit. I'm not denying that people lost their lives. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there's a deeper underlying story as to what actually happened, who orchestrated it, and why. But we'll move on to the next one.
According to standard operating procedure, if an FAA flight controller notices anything that suggests a possible hijacking, the controller is to contact a superior. If the problem cannot be fixed within about a minute, the superior is to ask NORAD, the North American Aerospace Command, to send up or scramble jet fighters to find out what is going on. NORAD then issues the scramble order to the nearest Air Force base with fighters on alert. But although interceptions usually occur within 10 or so minutes, in this case, 80 or so minutes had elapsed before fighters were even airborne.
It's a mind-bending anomaly. Not a single U.S. Air Force interceptor turns a wheel until it's too late. There are no jets at all.
What if they were so confused and had been so deliberately confused that they couldn't respond?
The reason that they didn't know where to go was because a number of conflicting and overlapping war game exercises were taking place. It involved the insertion of false radar blips onto radar screens in the Northeast Air Defense Sector.
Center Team U, we have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York. We need someone to scramble some F-16s or something up there to help us out.
Is this real world or exercise? Is this real world or exercise? There was another exercise, Vigilant Warrior, which was, in fact, according to a NORAD source, a live-fly hijack drill being conducted at the same time. With only 8 available fighter aircraft, and they have to be dispatched in pairs, they were dealing with as many as 22 possible hijacks on the day of 9/11, and they couldn't separate the war game exercises from the actual hijacks.
Page 172. The U.S. government has not been able to determine the origin of the money used for the 9/11 attacks. Ultimately, the question is of little practical significance.
The American authorities have not managed to trace the source of the funding. And then the most amazingly disingenuous statement, ultimately, is it of little consequence. It is of massive consequence.
Doesn't it matter who paid for 9/11?
The collapse of Building 7 has been recognized as especially difficult to explain. The 9/11 Commission report implicitly admitted that it could not explain the collapse of this building by not even mentioning it.
President, why are you and the Vice President insisting on appearing together before the 9/11 Commission?
Because the 9/11 Commission wants to ask us questions. That's why we're meeting, and I look forward to meeting with them and answering their questions.
Why you're appearing together rather than separately, which was their request?
Because it's a good chance for both of us to answer questions that the 9/11 Commission is looking forward to asking us, and I'm looking forward to answering them. Let's see.
Do you think they should be able to stand up and speak their own words?
They should go under oath.
They should be, yeah.
In public.
Don't you think that the families deserve to have a transcript or to be able to see what you
Adam,
said?
you asked me that question yesterday.
For an
I
answer
got the
today.
same answer, yeah.
The final report was a unanimous report. That means that if there was a single commissioner who had any objection about anything, that fact would be dropped from the report.
We have found out that he not only served on the transition team of the Bush administration, that he was a person who wrote a draft memo for the setup of the Bush administration's National Security Council, that he was an individual who wrote the preemptive war strategy that was eventually used for the war in Iraq, that he is a close friend of Condoleezza Rice's. We want him to resign.
So there is literally nothing in the 9/11 report that the Bush administration did not approve of.
We can understand, therefore, why the Commission, under Zelikow's leadership, would have ignored all the evidence that would point to the truth, that 9/11 was a false flag operation intended to authorize the doctrines and funds needed for a new level of imperial mobilization.
So now picture or story, more plausible story is becoming to emerge, that this incident that took place may have been as we've seen it, but it might have been orchestrated by others. Now, it's hard to then depict where this orchestration originated. The most obvious answer would be the central government of America, and that President Bush Jr. Gave the okay for it if he didn't come up with it himself. As a citizen of humanity, I hope that that is not the case. But it's really hard to argue anything otherwise. Everyone talks about the world elites, and I've touched on it in different places, in my book, other podcasts, my shorts, of a potential of the Freemasons' 33rd degree becoming enlightened and therefore transforming into possibly the Illuminati, the secret elite of elites, the ones that orchestrate everything behind closed doors, out of public view, some people may not even know that they're a part of a scheme or a plot, depending on how high ranking they are. But I think the one thing that would be clear to anyone that understands what I'm showing and what other people have shown, like the Zeitgeist film, and many, 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 many others, is that at the very least, Bush Jr. and his administration would most likely have been aware of something occurring. And then the reason as to why, which we will find out, but it comes down to the same as most other things: greed, money, profit, human lives being sacrificed, being lost to defend a nation's honour, as did many of the British and other NATO forces that joined this conflict post 9/11. You know, overthrowing Saddam Hussein, you know, going into Afghanistan. You know, the Middle East is rife with oil, which is a cornerstone of maximising profits. It's something that we all need, something that we all use. So it's hard to discourage that that's the motive behind this. But I'm hoping that you can see that there is now a more believable story or narrative coming into play. And I do hope to God that, you know, as many people in the world see this, because I think it's something, like with thousands, millions of other things, the problems of the world, and some of us see it, don't say nothing, know it and don't act on it, or just completely oblivious and naive to it. But it's something that we really need to, I mean, NORAD, I said it earlier, so I'm not going to drown on about it, but saying about, you know, doing these simulations or practice drills, exercises, 80-minute lapse time. Somebody, come on. You know, this is one of the greatest forces in the world. Somebody would have intervened up in high command saying all exercises are dropped. It's going down in New York, Washington, you know, wherever else. You know, we need to scrap this and terminate the exercises, and you know, it's real life, it's happening. It's just not plausible. But so I'm not going to carry on about it. I already spoke about it. Now the 9/11 Commission, the investigation. If they were able to do everything else, is it really unplausible to think that the 9/11 Commission, as heard in parts of that, wouldn't be able to be put in place to come to one outcome? You know, there's things not mentioned about Building 7, about the money, about other things. You know, this is evidence. You know, if you were a detective investigating a crime, you take all the evidence, no matter how small, how big, how insignificant, and investigate it, right? And it would, if nothing else, it would be included in any report because it's been investigated. Not in the 9/11 Commission. Now, again, it'll be another podcast, but the same thing happened with the committee that investigated the JFK assassination, which came to a specific conclusion. And who was head of that? I think it was the ex-director of the CIA that JFK had dismissed. And he's then in charge of the investigation into the legitimacy of the assassination of President Kennedy. Really? So let's move on, but let me know what you guys think. This is the one.
Our armed with knives, armed with chemical, biological, nuclear weapons. Fanatics, terrorists, September 11th. September 11th, killers, September 11th, terrorists. Terrorists of Al-Qaeda, terrorists, nuclear weapons, terrorists. 9/11, terror, terrorist, evil. September 11th, September 11th. The terrorists, war and danger. September 11th, terrorism, global terrorism, 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 terrorists, 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 the terror, terrorists, terrorist, terrorism. September 11th, global terrorism, terrorist, terrorism. September 11th, world terrorism, terrorism. September 11th, global terrorism. September the 11th, terror, weapons of mass destruction. September the 11th, terrorists, the evil terrorists, no.
Terrorism. The words are hypnotically repeated. Terrorism, terrorist, terrorist threat, and of course, believed to be linked to Al-Qaeda. But it's the so-called war on terrorism that's in our faces practically 24/7 as the inescapable focus of our existence.
One day, our grandchildren will look back on this time and ask, how was the war on terror won?
The entire U.S. ruling class, ruling elite, comes to see terrorism as the preferred means, indeed the only means, to provide social cohesion, to provide an enemy image for the society to keep it together. According to neocon theory from Carl Schmitt, you have to have an enemy image in order to have a society. It's a very dangerous thing because now it means that the entire social order, the political parties, intellectual life, politics in general, all based on a monstrous myth.
Look, the CIA has done in this country, what they've done to us is unbelievable. Look at the terrorist acts that have occurred. The CIA behind most, if not all of them. We had the Marine barracks. We had our embassy in Kenya. We had Pan Am 103. We had the USS Cole. We had Oklahoma City. We had the World Trade Center in 1993.
That helped the terrorists blow up the World Trade Center the first time. They built the bomb. They got the driver's license.
The informant, the informant, a fellow named Salam, a 43-year-old former Egyptian army officer, he was given the assignment to put the bomb together. And he went to his supervisor, his FBI supervisor, and said, we're going to put a dummy bomb in here, right? And the FBI supervisor said, no, we're going to put a real bomb.
FBI agents might have been able to prevent last February's deadly explosion at New York's World Trade Center. They discussed secretly substituting harmless powder for the explosives, but they didn't, according to the FBI's own informant, Imad Salem. Unbeknownst to the FBI at the time, Salem recorded many of his conversations with his handlers.
Unfortunately for them, there were only 6 people killed, not enough to pass the legislation. So what happened is 2 years later, April 19, 1995, down comes Oklahoma City Murrah building, 168 people killed. 1 year later, the anti-terrorism legislation that takes away many of our constitutional rights and civil liberties is passed.
Coincidence?
Because at 9:30 this morning, we were actually running an exercise for over a company of 1,000 people in London based on simultaneous bombs going off precisely at the railway stations that happened this morning. So I still have the hairs on the back of my neck standing upright.
To get this quite straight, you were running an exercise to see how you would cope with this, and it happened while you were running the exercise?
Precisely.
Supposed to believe is some kind of coincidence, there was also an anti-terrorist drill going on 7/7. And again,
MI5.
just like 9/11, they were talking about attacks on the same targets, the same kind of tube stations, and exactly the same time as the actual attack happened, providing some kind of cover for what must be operations orchestrated in some way by the state.
So there we go. Terror. It's one of the things that orchestrated me to write my book. It's one of the things that started all of this off, was all because of the 9/11 incident. It was all because of, at the age of 14, I'm nearly 40 now, the age of 14, I sat there, I was sad, I was emotional, I knew nobody that had died. It was the starting point in which I wanted to join the military. I wanted to defend the honour, the lives lost, the integrity. And then as I got older, did my own research, the way my brain works and analysing, stuff like that. It began to make less sense. And it seemed to be all orchestrated for money. And it, America is one of my most favourite countries to go to. But this isn't just America now. This is France, Spain, at home in the UK. That these instances are happening and solidifying our reasons for action. With any war, hostilities, innocent lives will always be lost. That's the biggest tragedy of war, other than war itself, is the fact that the inevitability of the loss of innocence, at the very least. War can be avoided, and I do optimistically, even though I'm more of a realist in my older years, believe and hope that will happen at some point. With what's going on at the moment, I find it hard to believe it'll happen in my lifetime, but I hope for the sake of our children, my children, generations to come, hundreds of years from now, that war between ourselves will be no more. All life is sacred, and which side's right, which side's wrong? Does it depend on which country you're from? Or your beliefs, religion? The fact of the matter is that war's wrong. If I was to have a disagreement with somebody on the street, in the next hour, and I punched them in the face because I didn't like what they said, I'd be arrested, I'd be tried, I'd be convicted, and I'd probably serve time in prison because I broke the law. Well, so why does wars happen? Wars start because of a disagreement, more often than not. A conflict of interests. So they threaten, they bomb, they invade. How is that any different? I'd love to hear your guys' thought. I am going to leave it there for today. It's probably a lot longer than I was hoping for, but this one's important, more so important. So, but this is what's led to this, everything that I'm doing. The media spreads news, right, wrong, or indifferent, like wildfire. And that can come through social media platforms, newspapers, radio, telly, adverts, and anything, films, books. But ever since 9/11, all I've heard is terror, 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 terrorist, 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 war on terror, war on terror. This is why we're doing what we're doing. I'm a taxi driver, and I had a young gentleman in my car not too long ago, a couple of months maybe, and he was like, Muslim this, Muslim that, terrorist this, terrorist that. And I rolled my eyes and I told him, I said to him, you're so misinformed and small-minded, it's untrue. And he was like, what do you mean? And I was like, how have you come up with, what are you talking about? Two of the biggest religions in the world, Catholicism, Islam. They have got mass followings. It's irrelevant whether you believe. It's irrelevant of if there is a God, if there isn't a God, if Catholics are right, Muslims are right, Jews are right. It makes no odds. The fact of the matter is, these are two massive followings. And the media post 9/11 have spread wildfire everywhere, essentially making every citizen of the world believe that any Muslim, especially an Arab Muslim, is a terrorist. If you believe that and you're watching this, read a book, watch something factual, have a very different mindset. When the issues in the UK happened in Northern Ireland with the IRA, they're Catholics, they're Irish, but at no point was it poisoned and spread that every Catholic or every Irish person was a terrorist. Because it's stupid. You can't paint the same canvas or loads of canvases with the same brush. It does not work. It is ridiculous. And you need to give your head a wobble. Best way to put it. Not every Muslim is a terrorist. So I'm going to leave you with this final note. With 9/11, the World Trade Centers were hit. The Pentagon was hit. Surely if you're going after one of the biggest, greatest, powerfulest nations in the world to be heard, because that's what terrorists want, they want to skip all of the cues and the diplomacy and just hit hard with action to be heard. That's what they want, to be heard, and for action to happen right now. Not that that's excusing it, but that's what it is. Why wouldn't you go after the White House? Why wouldn't you go after the President of the United States? Why would you attack the World Trade Centers? I'll leave you with that. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you for the next one. Take care.
Thanks for watching the One Opinion in 8 Billion podcast. The truth is rarely simple, but the questions are always worth asking. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and join the conversation, because the biggest questions in life deserve to be explored.